Chapter 18: The Black Death. The centralization of papal power culminated under Pope Innocent IV, who held the papal reins from 1243 until 1254. Innocent IV attempted to turn the papacy into the world's highest political authority by proclaiming that the Pope was the vicar or earthly representative of the Creator, to whom every human creature is subjected. It was under Innocent IV that the Inquisition was made an official institution of the Roman Catholic Church. Despite the oppression of the Inquisition, Europe in the 13th century was beginning to recover from the economic and social disruption caused by the Crusades. Signs of a European Renaissance were visible in the widening of intellectual and artistic horizons. Trade with other parts of the world did much to enrich European life. Europe was entering an era in which chivalry, music, art, and spiritual values were playing greater roles. Hardly a century of this progress had passed, however, before a disastrous event abruptly brought it to a temporary halt. That event was the bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death. The Black Death began in Asia and soon spread to Europe, where it killed well over 25 million people, about one-third of Europe's total population. In less than 4 years, some historians put the casualty figure close to 35 to 40 million people, or about half of all Europeans. The epidemic first spread through Europe between 1347 and 1350. The bubonic plague continued to strike Europe with decreasing fatality every 10 to 20 years in short-lived outbreaks, all the way up until the 1700s. Although it is difficult to calculate the number of deaths from that 400-year period, it is believed that over 100 million people may have died from the plague. Two types of plague are believed to have caused the Black Death. The first is the bubonic plague, which was the most common. The bubonic form of plague is characterized by swellings of the lymph nodes. The swellings are called buboes. The buboes are accompanied by vomiting, fever, and death within several days, if not treated. This form of plague is not contagious between human beings. It requires an active carrier, such as a flea. For this reason, many historians believe that flea-infested rodents cause the bubonic plague. Rodents are known to carry the disease even today. A number of records from between 1347 and the late 1600s speak of rodent infestations prior to several outbreaks of the Black Death, lending credence to the rodent theory. The second form of plague contributing to the Black Death is a highly contagious type known as pneumonic. It is marked by shivering, rapid breathing, and the coughing up of blood. Body temperatures are high, and death normally follows 3 to 4 days after the disease has been contracted. The second type of plague is nearly always fatal and transmits best in cold weather and in poor ventilation. Some physicians today believe it was this second form, the pneumonic plague, which was responsible for most of the casualties of the Black Death because of the crowding and poor hygienic conditions then prevalent in Europe. We would normally shake our heads at this tragic period of human history and be thankful that modern medicine has developed cures for these dread diseases. However, troubling enigmas about the Black Death still linger. Many outbreaks occurred in summer during warm weather in uncrowded regions. Not all outbreaks of bubonic plague were preceded by rodent infestation. In fact, only a minority of cases seem to be related to an increase in the presence of vermin. The greatest puzzle about the Black Death is how it was able to strike isolated human populations which had no contact with earlier infected areas. The epidemics also tended to end abruptly. To solve these puzzles, an historian would normally look to records from the plague from the plague years to see what people were reporting. When he does so, he encounters stories so stunning and unbelievable that he is likely to reject them as the fantasies and superstitions of badly frightened minds. A great many people throughout Europe and other plague-stricken regions of the world were reporting that outbreaks of the plague were caused by foul-smelling mists. Those mists frequently appeared after unusually bright lights in the sky. The historian quickly discovers that mists and bright lights were reported far more frequently and in many more locations than were rodent infestations. The plague years were in fact a period of heavy UFO activity. What then were the mysterious mists? There is another very important way in which plague germs can be transmitted, through germ weapons. The United States and the Soviet Union today have stockpiles of biological weapons containing bubonic plague and other epidemic diseases. The germs are kept alive in canisters which spray the diseases into the air on thick, often visible, artificial mists. Anyone breathing in the mist will inhale the disease. There are enough such germ weapons today to wipe out a good portion of humanity. Reports of identical disease-inducing mists from the plague years strongly suggest that the Black Death was caused by germ warfare. Let us take a look at the incredible reports which lead to that conclusion. The first outbreak of the plague in Europe followed an unusual series of events. Between 1298 and 1314, 7 large comets, they've got comets in exclamation, marks, speech marks, were seen over Europe. One was of awe-inspiring blackness, that's a quote, 1 year before the first outbreak of the epidemic in Europe. A column of fire was reported over the Pope's palace at Avignon, France. Earlier that year, a ball of fire was observed over Paris. It reportedly remained visible to observers for some time. To the people of Europe, these sightings were considered omens of the plague, which soon followed. It is true that some reported comets were probably just that, comets. Some may also have been small meteors or fireballs, large blazing meteors. Centuries ago, people were generally far more superstitious than they are today, and so natural meteors and similar prosaic phenomena were often reported as precursors to later disasters, even though there was no real-life connection. On the other hand, it is important to note that almost any unusual object in the sky was called a comet. A good example is found in a best-selling book published in 1557, A Chronicle of Prodigies and Portents by Conrad Lycosthenes. Oh my goodness. Now, there's a footnote. This was a second unauthorized... Oh no, sorry, there's a second footnote. The complete title to that book is... They used to have long titles in them days. A chronicle of prodigies and portents that have occurred beyond the right order, operation and working of nature in both the upper and lower regions of the earth from the beginning of the world up to these present times. That was the title. Catchy? So that was by Conrad Lycosthenes. I'm definitely not saying that right. On page 494, we read of a comet observed in the year 1479. A comet was seen in Arabia in the manner of a sharply pointed wooden beam. The accompanying illustration, which was based on eyewitness descriptions, shows what clearly looks like the front half of a rocket ship among some clouds. The object appears to have many portholes. Today we would call that object a UFO, not a comet. This leads us to wonder how many other ancient comets were actually similar rocket-like objects. When we are confronted with an old report of a comet, we therefore do not really know what kind of thing we are dealing with, unless there is a fuller description. A report of a sudden increase in comets or similar celestial phenomena may in fact mean an increase in UFO activity. The link between unusual aerial phenomena and the Black Death was established immediately during the first outbreaks of the plague in Asia, as one historian tells. The first reports of the plague came out of the East. They were confused, exaggerated, frightening, as reports from that quarter of the world so often are. Descriptions of storms and earthquakes, of meteors and comets trailing noxious gases that killed trees and destroyed the fertility of the land. The above passage indicates that strange flying objects were doing more than just spreading disease. They were also apparently spraying chemical or biological defoliants from the air. The above passage echoes the ancient Mesopotamian tablets which described defoliation of the landscape by ancient celestial gods. Many human casualties from the Black Death may have been caused by such defoliants. The connection between aerial phenomena and plague had begun centuries before the Black Death. We saw examples in our earlier discussion of Justinian's plague. Mark's reading this. We read from another source about a large plague that had reportedly broken out in the year 1117, almost 250 years before the Black Death. The plague was also preceded by unusual celestial phenomena. In 1117, in January, a comet passed like a fiery army from the north towards the Orient. The moon was overcast, blood red in an eclipse. A year later, a light appeared more brilliant than the sun. This was followed by great cold, famine, and plague, of which 1/3 of humanity is said to have perished. Once the medieval Black Death got started, noteworthy aerial phenomena continued to accompany the dreaded epidemic. Reports of many of these phenomena were assembled by Johann Knoll and published in his book The Black Death, A Chronicle of the Plague in 1926. According to Mr. Knoll, at least 26 comets were reported between 1500 and 1543. 15 or 16 were seen between 1556 and 1597. In the year 1618, 8 or 9 were observed. Mr. Knoll emphasizes the connection which people perceived between the comets and subsequent epidemics. In the year 1606, a comet was seen, after which a general plague traversed the world. In 1582, a comet brought so violent a plague upon Majo, Prague, Thuringia, the Netherlands, and other places, that in Thuringia it carried off 37,000, and in the Netherlands 46,415. From Vienna, Austria, we get the following description of an event which happened in 1568. Here we see a connection between an outbreak of plague and an object described in a manner remarkably similar to a modern cigar or beam-shaped UFO. When the sun and moonlight, a beautiful rainbow and a fiery beam were seen hovering above the church of St. Stephanie, which was followed by a violent epidemic in Austria, Swabia, Augsburg, Württemberg, Nuremberg, and other places, carrying off human beings and cattle. Sightings of unusual aerial phenomena usually occurred from several minutes to a year before the outbreak of plague. Where there was a gap between such a sighting and the aerial arrival of the plague, a second phenomena was sometimes reported: the appearance of frightening human-like figures dressed in black. Those figures were often seen out on the outskirts of town or village, and their presence would signal the outbreak of an epidemic almost immediately. A summary written in 1682 tells of one such visit a century earlier. In Brandenburg, Germany, there appeared in 1559 horrible men, of whom at first 15 and later on 12 were seen. The foremost had beside their posteriors little heads, the others fearful faces and long scythes, with which they cut at the oats, so that the swish could be heard at a great distance, but the oats remained standing. When a quantity of people came running out to see them, they went on with their mowing. The visit of the strange men to the oat fields was followed immediately by a severe outbreak of the plague in Brandenburg. This incident raises intriguing questions. Who were the mysterious figures? What were the long scythe-like instruments they held that emitted a loud swishing sound? It appears that the scythes may have been long instruments designed to spray poison or germ-laden gas. This would mean that the townspeople misinterpreted the movement of the scythes as an attempt to cut oats, when in fact the movements were the act of spraying aerosols on the town. Similar men dressed in black were reported in Hungary. In the year of Christ 1571 was seen at Krementz in the mountain towns of Hungary on Ascension Day in the evening, to the great perturbation of all, when on the Schlossberg there appeared so many black riders that the opinion was prevalent that the Turks were making a secret raid, but who rapidly disappeared again, and thereupon a raging plague broke out in the neighbourhood. Strange men dressed in black, demons, and other terrifying figures were observed in other European communities. The frightening creatures were often observed carrying long brooms, scythes, or swords that were used to sweep or knock at the doors of people's homes. The inhabitants of those homes fell ill with plague afterwards. It is from these reports that people created the popular image of death as a skeleton or demon carrying a scythe. The scythe came to symbolize the act of death, mowing down people like stalks of grain. In looking at this haunting image of death, we may in fact be staring into the face of the UFO. Of all the phenomena connected to the Black Death, by far the most frequently reported were the strange noxious mists. The vapours were often observed even when the other phenomena were not. Mr. Knoll points out that moist pestilential fogs were a feature which preceded the epidemic throughout its whole course. A great many physicians of the time took it for granted that the strange mists caused the plague. This connection was established at the very beginning of the Black Death, as Mr. Knoll tells us. The origin of the plague lay in China. There it is said to have commenced to rage already in the year 1333, after a terrible mist emitting a fearful stench and infecting the air. So we've got 333. And as an aside, the Great Fire of London was 1666. They do like their numbers. They do like threes and sixes, don't they? So let me read that again. It's quite important. The origin of the plague lay in China. There it is said to have commenced to rage already in the year 1333, after a terrible mist emitting a fearful stench and infecting the air. Another account stresses that the plague did not spread from person to person, but was contracted by breathing the deadly striking air. During the whole of the year 1382 there was no wind, in consequence of which the air grew putrid, so that an epidemic broke out, and the plague did not pass from one man to another, but everyone who was killed by it got it straight from the air. I will repeat, the plague did not pass from one man to another. Stay home, stay safe. 6 feet, keep away from me, 6 feet on it. Social distance. Lock everybody down. The plague did not pass from one man to another, but everyone who was killed by it got it straight from the air. Reports of deadly mists and pestilential fogs came from all plague-infested parts of the world. So this is, if you've got a plague, you've had these mists. They're hand in hand. A Prague chronicle describes the epidemic in China, India, and Persia, and the Florentine historian Matteo Villani, who took up the work of his brother Giovanni after he had died of the plague in Florence, relays the account of earthquakes and pestilential fogs from a traveller in Asia. The same historian continues. A similar incidence of earthquake and pestilential fog was reported from Cyprus, and it was believed that the wind had been so poisonous that men were struck down and died from it. He adds, German accounts speak of a heavy, vile-smelling mist which advanced from the east and spread itself over Italy. That author states that in other countries, people were convinced that they could contract the disease from the stench, or even, as is sometimes described, actually see the plague coming through the streets as a pale fog. He summarizes rather dramatically. The earth itself seemed in a state of convulsion, shuddering and spitting, putting forth heavy poisonous winds that destroyed animals and plants and called swarms of insects to life to complete the destruction. Similar happenings are echoed by other writers. A journal from 1680 reported this odd incident: that between Eisenberg and Dornberg 30 funeral biers (casket stands), all covered with black cloth, were seen in broad daylight. Among them, on a bier, a black man was standing with a white cross. When these had disappeared, a great heat set in, so that the people in this place could hardly stand it. But when the sun had set, they perceived so sweet a perfume as if they were in a garden of roses. By this time they were all plunged in perturbation, whereupon the epidemic set in Thuringia, in many places. Further south in Vienna, evil-smelling mists are blamed, as indicative of the plague, and of these, indeed, several were observed last autumn. Direct from the plague-ravaged town of Eisenbahn we get this amusing and perhaps exaggerated newspaper account, published on September 1st, 1682. In a cemetery of Eisleben, on the 6th, doesn't say when, at night the following incident was noticed. When during the night the grave diggers were hard at work digging trenches, for on many days between 80 and 90 have died, they suddenly observed that the cemetery church, more especially the pulpit, was lighted up by bright sunshine. But on their going up to it, so deep a darkness and black, thick fog came over the graveyard that they could hardly see one another, and which they took to be an evil omen. Thus day and night gruesome evil spirits are seen frightening the people, goblins grinning at them and pelting them, but also many white ghosts and spectres. The same newspaper story later adds, when Magister Hart explained in his agony, a blue smoke was seen to rise from his throat, and this in the presence of the Dean. The same has been observed in the case of others expiring. In the same manner, blue smoke has been observed to rise from the gables of houses at Eisleben, all the inhabitants of which have died. In the church of St. Peter, blue smoke has been observed high up near the ceiling. On this account the church was shunned, particularly as the parish has been exterminated. The mists or plague poisons were thick enough to mix with normal air moisture and become part of the morning dew. People were warned to take the following precautions. If newly baked bread is placed for the night at the end of a pole, and in the morning is found to be mildewed and internally grown green, yellow, and uneatable, and when thrown to fowls and dogs causes them to die from eating it, in a similar manner, if fowls drink the morning dew and die in consequence, then the plague poison is near at hand. This is unbelievable. As noted earlier, lethal mists were directly associated with bright moving lights in the sky. Other sources for the stenches were also reported. For example, Faustus Alcmarianos wrote of a monstrous whale he had encountered, which was 28 ells, or 105 feet, in length, and 14 ells, 33 feet, broad, which, coming from the western sea, was thrown upon the shore of Egmont by great waves, and was unable to reach the open again. It produced so great a foulness and malignity of the air that very soon a great epidemic broke out in Egmont and neighbourhood. Sorry, I couldn't say that word. It is a shame that Mr. Alcamarinos did not provide a more detailed description of the deadly whale, because it may have been a craft similar to modern UFOs, which have been observed entering and leaving bodies of water. On the other hand, Mr. Alcmarinos' whale may have been just that, a dead, rotting whale which happened to wash up on shore just before a nearby outbreak of the plague. It is significant that foul mists and bad air were blamed for many other epidemics in history. During the plague in ancient Rome, the famous physician Hippocrates stated that the disease, this is in 460 to 337 BC, stated that the disease was caused by body disturbances brought on by changes in the atmosphere. To remedy this, Hippocrates had people build large public bonfires. He believed that large fires would set the air alight. Hippocrates' advice was followed centuries later by physicians during the medieval plague. Modern doctors take a dim view of Hippocrates' advice on this matter, however, in the belief that he was ignorant about the true causes of the plague. In reality, large outdoor fires were the only conceivable defense against the plague, if it was indeed caused by germ-saturated aerosols. Vaccines to combat the plague had not been invented, and so the people's only hope was to burn away the deadly mists with fire. Hippocrates and those who followed his advice may have actually saved some lives. Significantly, bubonic and pneumonic plagues were not the only infectious diseases in history to be spread on strange lethal fogs. The deadly intestinal disease cholera was another. When cholera broke out on board Her Majesty's ship Britannia in the Black Sea in 1854, several officers and men asserted positively that, immediately prior to the outbreak, a curious dark mist swept up from the sea and passed over the ship. The mist had barely cleared the vessel when the first case of disease was announced. Blue mists were also reported in connection with the cholera outbreaks of 1832 and 1848 to 1849 in England. As mentioned earlier, plagues had a very strong religious significance. In the Bible, plagues were said to be Jehovah's method of punishing people for evil. Omens preceding outbreaks of the Black Death resembled many of the omens reported in the Bible. Men confronted with the terror of the Black Death were impressed by the chain of events leading up to the final plague, and accounts of the coming of the 14th century pestilence selected from among all the ominous events that must have occurred in the years preceding the outbreak of 1348, those which closely resemble the 10 plagues of Pharaoh. Disruptions in the atmosphere, storms, unusual invasions of insects, celestial phenomena. In addition, the bubonic form of plague was very similar, if not identical, to some of the punishments inflicted by God in the Old Testament. So this is 1 Samuel 5-6. But the hand of the Lord was heavy upon the people of Ashdod, a Philistine city, and he destroyed them and killed them with emerods, painful swellings. The hand of the Lord was against the city, Gath, another Philistine city, with a very great destruction, and he killed the men of the city, both young and old, and they had emerods in their secret parts. There was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there, and the men that survived were afflicted with the emerods, and the crying of the city went up to heaven. Now, this next one, I'm going to play some bits off YouTube, but I'm going to have to stop, because otherwise I'll get kicked off, and we haven't got many. I think we've only got one chance left. So I'll also put beside it where I got this video from, so you can go back onto YouTube and find the actual video so that you can hear it better than what I'm going to do. So the religious aspect of the medieval Black Death was enhanced by reports of thundering sounds in connection with outbreaks of the plague. The sounds were similar to those described in the Bible as accompanying the appearance of Jehovah. Interestingly, they are also sounds common to some UFO sightings. So I'll play it now.
Is that sound? You can hear that, right?
Yeah, what is it?
I've got no idea.
It's okay, man.
Hope you saw that. I'm going to play it again just in case you didn't. During the plague of 1565 in Italy, rumblings of thunder were heard day and night, as in a war, together with the turmoil and noise as of a mighty army. In Germany, in many places, a noise was heard as if a hearse were passing through the streets of its own accord. Similar noises accompanied strange aerial phenomena in remarkable plague-related sightings from England. The object described in the quote below remained visible for over a week and does not appear to be a true comet or planet such as Venus. However, some of the other objects can only be labelled unidentified. Historian Walter George Bell, drawing on writings from this period, summarised: Late into dark December nights of the year 1664, London citizens sat up to watch a new blazing star. With mighty talk thereupon, King Charles II and his Queen gazed out of the windows at Whitehall. About east it rose, reaching no great altitude, and sank below the south-west horizon between 2 and 3 o'clock. In a week or two it was gone. Then letters came from Vienna, notifying the sight of a brilliant comet, and in the air the appearance of a coffin, which causes great anxiety of thought amongst the people. Effort saw with it other terrible apparitions, and listeners detected noises in the air, as of fires and sounds of cannon and musket shot. The report ran one night in the February following hundreds of persons had seen flames of fire for an hour together, which seemed to be thrown from Whitehall to St. James and then back again to Whitehall, whereafter they disappeared. In March there came into the heavens a yet brighter comet, visible 2 hours after midnight, and so continuing till daylight. With such ominous potence, the Great Plague in London was ushered in. Other less frequent omens were also reported in connection with the Black Death. Some of those phenomena were obvious fictions. Significantly, the fictions were not widespread and were rarely reported outside of the communities in which they originated. The preceding quotes provide evidence that UFOs, i.e. the custodial society, have bombarded the human race with deadly diseases. This evidence is particularly intriguing when we consider claims made by a number of modern UFO contactees who say that they are relaying messages to mankind from the UFO Society. Some of them claim that UFOs are here to help mankind and that UFOs will eradicate disease on Earth. The UFO civilization reportedly has no disease. If the custodial civilization is indeed so healthy, perhaps it is only because it is not bombarding itself with germ weapons. If UFOs truly intend to bring health to the human race, maybe all they needed to do was to stop spraying infectious biological agents into the air. The Black Death not only killed a great many people, it also caused deep psychological and social wounds. People in the past were convinced that the epidemics were God's punishment for sin, and this caused deep introversion. It was natural for people to accuse themselves and their neighbours of wickedness and to wonder what they had done to deserve their punishment. Still going on today. It rarely occurred to the victims that plagues, even if deliberately inflicted, had nothing to do with trying to make human beings more virtuous. I'm just having a pause to think about the virtue signalling that went on in 2020. After all, the social and psychological effects of the plague produced the opposite result. The misery and despair generated by the massive death tolls brought about widespread ethical decay. This is just one picture. I could have done the riots. I could have done, well, we know, don't we? We know what I could have done. In a dying environment, many people will no longer care about whether their actions are right or wrong. They are going to die anyway. In the fearful climate of the medieval plague, this is exactly what's going on today. The death cult. Oh, plague. Oh, climate change. Oh, riots. And look what's happening to our society. It's the same. Right, somebody said, "Oh, I like your reading because you never had comments." I thought, "Oh dear, you haven't read it all, listened to it all, my love." Can't help it, because it's so relevant to today. I can't help it. Let's read that again. In a dying environment, many people will no longer care about whether their actions are right or wrong. They're going to die anyway. In the fearful climate of the medieval plague, spiritual values noticeably declined and mental aberration sharply increased. The same results are observed during war. Although the Bible and other religious works may preach that plagues and wars are created by God to ultimately make the human race more virtuous and spiritually advanced, the effect is always the opposite. The cataclysmic nature of the Black Death overshadowed another disastrous occurrence of the plague years, a renewed attempt by Christians to exterminate the Jews. Now, this is going to be triggering for some people, including me. False accusation. Am I even allowed to say that? I'm going to have to say the J words because we live in a free society. So, yeah. False accusations circulated by Jays were causing the plague by poisoning wells. These rumours stirred up a fearsome hatred of Jays inside those Christian communities being devastated by the epidemic. Many Christians participated in the genocides, which have claimed as many lives, if not more, than the slaughter of the Jays by the Nazis in the 20th century, according to Collier's Encyclopedia. They're all the same, aren't they? Those three Abrahamic religions, to be fair. That country, beginning with G, you've got to censor yourself, honestly. You're not even allowed to say the word noticed. Oh, oopsie. Noticed is... Oh, I've done... Well, let's hope they don't notice. Anyway. This isn't a very professional one, but I'm not going to lie. This one's caused me a lot of angst. Not going to lie, because one of my scariest things is chemtrails. I've been banging on about it for years. It's one of the scariest things. I know they're talking about banana plague, aren't they? So it's hard. I'm reading this because it needs to get out there to what, 40 people? Please tell people about this and share it, please. It's so important. Not because of me and me wanting people to listen to me, because this is so important. I've been up since 1:30. That the other day it was 3:30. I've been up since 1:30. Because I can't sleep. So I was listening to Bob Marley to try and cheer me up while I was trying to find pictures for this. So if this one particularly, forgive my little ramblings, because this is depressing shit, man. Okay, so some bloke said something. That country, G, figured as a site of brutal massacres on the widest possible scale, which periodically swept the country from end to end. These culminated at the time of the terrible plague of 1348 to 49, known as the Black Death. Perhaps because medical knowledge and hygienic way of life rendered them somewhat less susceptible than others, the Jays, let's read that again, perhaps their medical knowledge and hygienic way of life rendered them somewhat less susceptible than others, the Jays were preposterously accused of having deliberately propagated the plague. So they were less susceptible, and people thought because of that they started it. So people thought that, and because of that, hundreds of Jay communities, large and small, were blotted out of existence or reduced to insignificance. Oh, and this goes with biblical prophecy. It's even now. Moshiach will return when when um when what is it? What is it? Gog and Magog, Edom. It's all to do with the two brothers, and I can never remember it is in the Bible that fight, and it basically means it means Russia and all that side versus the West, and there's going to be a big battle. But before that big battle, everybody has to hate the Jays. So they're kind of throwing the people, they're throwing themselves under the bus, but it's not themselves. Oh, God. I'm going to have to cut this out. I'm going to cut this out. So I just cut out a rambly thing. Sorry, I'm going off. I've nearly finished. But it is in it, the Moshiach will come back. That's their Messiah. But he's not like a godlike. He's a man, somebody that walks on the earth. Not even one, I don't think. I'm going to cut this out as well. Cut it out, Liz. Cut it out. So basically, I've cut out 2 lots of rambling now. So I'm going to try and condense this. It's prophesied that when the Jays are hated all over the world, their Moshiach, Antichrist, will come back. And that's what they're waiting for. And some people think it's Trump. But there is definitely an uptick in people being cross with J's because of what's happening in P. Only a few large German J communities, such as Frankfurt am Main or Worms, managed to maintain an unbroken existence from medieval times onward. The genocides were often instigated by German trade guilds, which excluded Jays from membership. Many of those guilds were direct offshoots of the ancient Brotherhood guilds, In fact, membership in brotherhood organisations and European trade guilds still overlapped heavily in the 14th century, with leadership in the guilds often being held by men who were members of the brotherhood organisations. Here again was an instance in which the corrupted brotherhood network was a significant contributor, if not the primary source, of a major historical genocide. And that's what's going on today. Germany was not only nation to host Jay slaughters, the same occurred in Spain. In 1391, a massacre of Jays was perpetrated throughout much of the Spanish peninsula. Although frightened Christians supplied the manpower for these terrible genocides, I think I'm on my way out with this one. Their activities were not always endorsed by the papacy. To the credit of Clement VI, who served as Pope from 1342 until 1352, he tried almost immediately to protect the Jays from massacre. Clement VI issued 2 papal bulls declaring the Jays to be innocent of the charges against them. The bulls called upon all Christians to cease their persecutions. Clement VI did not fully succeed, however, because by that time many of the secretive trade guilds had become a united faction engaged in anti-papal activity. Pope Clement also did not dismantle the Inquisition, and the Inquisition did much to create the generally oppressive social climate in which such massacres could occur. The combination of plague, Inquisition, and genocide provided all of the elements needed to fulfill apocalyptic prophecy, and it's happening again. The Catholic Church was on the brink of collapse due to the many clergymen lost to the plague, and from the loss of popular faith in the Church caused by the Church's inability to bring an end to God's disease. A great many people were proclaiming that the end of days were at hand. True to prophecy, out of this tumult emerged new messengers from God, with promises of an imminent utopia. The teachings and proclamations of these new messiahs had an electrifying effect on the ravaged Europeans and brought about an event of major importance, the Protestant Reformation. Okay. And they want all of that to happen again so that they can bring in the New World Order, the one world religion. This has happened before. Please tell people about this. Not for me. Oh God, I hope the next one. Next one's Luther and the Rose. So yeah, Rosicrucianism and all that. The Illuminati's coming into the next one. That was a depressing one. It's taken me like 3 days to get this far. Okay, bye.